drag that in directly from there, and then execute it. And you can see now I'm getting my account information. Hey guys, today I wanted to show you how to make this little workflow I made, but more importantly, for those of you interested in connecting your Coinbase to n8n and getting information from Coinbase to n8n, how to do that. Because I know for me, this took me weeks to figure out actually. The whole authorization process was really confusing for me. And only like yesterday, I finally figured out how to get it done without any issues in authentication. So yeah, I'm going to teach you how to connect to that. In my specific case, it's going to be, yeah, like just getting the assets from my crypto account and putting it into a spreadsheet. But obviously you can do whatever you want. I'm just going to show you how to connect to Coinbase and then show you the how I get the values out of there, because that's also another thing that you might not be considering. It can get a bit confusing just based on how the Coinbase API works. So without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so just the wireframe for this. You can tell it's very simple. We have, as with every n8n workflow, we have a trigger. So in my case, I want this to run once a week, Saturdays at 9 a.m., because that's when I kind of do my weekly finances and check in on my assets. So you have a trigger, and then you just want to grab the Coinbase assets. So it seems simple enough. You guys saw the automation that I had set up. Obviously, this is way more than 2 steps. I learned a lot along the way, and we're going to update the wireframe as we go to account for any of that. But like just going into this project, you just think, okay, trigger, and then you think, you know, API call. We can even make this blue for an API call. So that's the assumed situation here, right? But in fact, it's not that simple, and you're going to see why. Like I mentioned before, the first step here is going to be to trigger the workflow. And for those of you who have never made an n8n workflow before, every workflow has some sort of trigger. Basically, that's a thing that starts the workflow process. You could trigger it manually by just clicking the button to execute the workflow. There's so many other ways to do it on certain events, on a schedule, on a webhook, form submission, on a chat message if you have an AI node. In this case, I'm going to do it on a schedule because, again, I want to check my asset count every week, once a week. So you can see with the schedule trigger, it's very straightforward. I want it to trigger not by days, but by weeks, every week. You have the option for days. So I'm going to click Saturday, and you can do whatever time you want, basically. I'm going to do 9 a.m. flat, but if you want to do it at a certain minute, you can add 45. So this would be 9:45. Or you could add 33. That'd be 9:33. You can't do 3:33. But yeah, anyway, I'm going to have this trigger at 9 a.m. flat. And the other thing for schedule triggers is in order for it to recognize that it's being triggered, the workflow has to be active, right? So your schedule trigger will now trigger executions on the schedule you have defined. Yeah, so make sure that if you're doing a schedule trigger that you make your workflow active. This is just a demo, so I'm going to turn that off for now. Yeah, the next step is actually figuring out what we need from Coinbase. So I'm going to go to the Coinbase documentation and just show you how I figured this out. Okay, so if you Google Coinbase API, you're going to find a bunch of different APIs here. I'm pretty sure it's the data API, I want to say. So just go to developer docs. I don't even think this is it. Just go to the documentation. We want to go to the API reference, and it's going to explain a lot of things. The first thing you're going to need actually is to grab a key. So in order to get an API key, you want to go to the dev portal. Once you're in this dev portal, you're going to have all this stuff. You don't really need to do any of this. All you need is an API key. So click create API key. You see I've already made one here. And if you've never done API keys before, make sure to never share these with anybody else, because if you do, they basically have access to whatever permissions you've granted to that API key, which could be, in Coinbase situation, pretty bad. All you gotta do is click create an API key, and you gotta give it a name. So this is gonna be a n8n demo. And for what else you want to go to advanced settings. And for this tutorial, you wanna make sure it's set to ECDSA, because that's the required algorithm for authentication. I'll show you why that is later, but for now, just make sure you mark that off. That's all you gotta do. Then create the key. It's going to give you all this information that you want to save because it's never going to be showed again. You also have the option to download it. It'll give you like a file, but I'm going to delete this information later, so I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to save this info. And one thing I almost forgot to mention, this key looks very confusing for those of you who've worked with API keys before. Usually when you get a key, it'll just be like a bunch of letters and numbers. But this one also includes this thing that says begin EC private key and end EC private key. You want to save all of that. Same goes with the original one, the API key ID. It's kind of weirdly formatted. You want to save the whole thing. So just literally just click copy and then save that to a secure location. So if we go back to the Coinbase documentation, now it's time to figure out how to actually get access to this stuff. So we don't want to be here. What we're trying to do is get our wallet information. So that's going to be a consumer API. So I believe consumer is here. I think it's an app API thing, if I remember correctly. And what we want to do is we want to have access to the track accounts. So if I'm going to open this, you can see if we scroll down here that one of the benefits of this API is you can get our whole account resource, and from there we get our different values. So for example, if you have BTC, it might show you the balance of that, right? And the amount. So you have the amount of BTC. It kind of puts it in a neat formulation for you. And if you have multiple coins, basically you just can use this endpoint to grab the information for all that stuff. So we're going to stick with V2 accounts for this demonstration. Now we're going to get back to this page later, but really what we're looking for here is how to actually get this information. So we have to go to a place here in the docs that says authentication and authorization. We want to go to API key authentication. So we're going to go down here. And again, this is why we wanted to do the ECDSA, because it specifically says here that ED25519 is not supported. So make sure again that your API key is set up to ECDSA. So basically it's a lot of different jargon here, but what they're saying is in order to make requests, you need to generate something called a JSON web token. There's a lot of ways to do this. We're going to do this using the JWT node, which I'll explain soon. But basically, they want you to generate this token with very specific parameters. And then once you're doing your API request, you're going to use that as an authentication method. So again, there's a lot of little parameters here. They give you code snippets for examples. So we're going to use those as models, but I'm going to show you why we can't just use them straight up. So basically give you some guidelines here. Replace the key name and key secret with your key name and private key. Key secret is a multi-line key, and lines must be preserved to properly parse the key. So that when I said to completely copy the previous private key you got before, I meant it. Anyway, this stuff isn't really that important. What is important is this code. So for those of you who don't know, if you work in the n8n cloud, basically you can't do things like install packages like this. It's just a thing that you can't do in the cloud. If you're self-hosting, you can do it. But if you're working in n8n cloud, you just can't. So you can run code in n8n cloud. You can run JavaScript code, but I'm just going to show you, this is the code they provide for you in order to get your JWT. But I'm going to show you the error that pops up if you try to do it like this. If all we did for now was go right from this trigger to a code node, plug in that code they gave us, we'd have to replace the key name and the key secret with the stuff that we got. So I'm going to do that right now. And we're going to say, okay, execute it. But unfortunately, after executing, you can see that module JSON web token is disallowed. So it requires JSON web token. And as you can remember in the documentation here, the first step was to install this package. We can't do that. Luckily, n8n has a different feature called a JWT node, which can generate this whole JWT thing that they're wanting from scratch. And we're going to get into that now. Instead of that code node, we're going to do this. We're going to search up JWT, and we're going to do sign. That's basically the same thing as generating, and that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to generate one. So there's a few things for this node. We're going to call this generate JWT, and we're going to call it Coinbase JWT, just so we know. So the first thing you want to do is you want to select a credential. I'm going to make a new one for the sake of this demo. I'm going to call this Coinbase demo, so we know what key that is. For the key type, you're going to want to use a PEM key, which I think is a private something something key. I wish I remembered. Let's Google it. Okay, PM key is privacy enhanced mail. Anyway, you want to click expression so you can see it. And for the private key, the same thing as before, you want to copy the key you got, the private key before. And like I mentioned, you want to keep everything in there. So that includes the backspaces and the backslash ends, which in coding terms, that just means like a new line, but you want to keep that in here. You also want to go to expression for public key and do the same thing, but grab the public key, just like so, fully in. Now for the algorithm, if you remember before, it mentioned that we want to use ES256. So all code examples below use the ES256 algorithm. So that's the only supported signature algorithm for Coinbase app SDKs. So you have to make sure that you're doing the same thing here. Don't forget to save. And then we're going to go to the next step. So again, we're doing a sign to generate a token. Now, there's two ways to build what's called a payload. For the sake of this tutorial, we're going to go with JSON because we need a bit more customization than they originally give us. So you can see we're going to model it off of this original code. This is what's called the payload right here. So they have an issuer and two dates, the key name and a URI. And for now, I know this might not make sense. It's a bit of a long explanation. I'll explain what little bit I can. But literally just make this an expression and then open it up so you can see more. And you want to have this exact format. So for ISS, which is issuer, you want CDP for Coinbase Developer Platform. Make sure you have it formatted with the quotes and everything going forwards. Not before. So if you remember in the documentation, they basically said that they want the token to be issued from now up till 2 minutes from now. Now, I did -5 because some computers basically are, their time is a bit off. That's what the token is generated from. So having some leeway is fine. For the expiration, again, they want 2 minutes. So that'd be 120 seconds. But again, some more space, 180. And in my testing, that's been working just fine. So you can do it like that. For sub, again, that's your key app key ID. Same exact thing. You can copy paste it in here. There's better ways for security if you want to use a set node, but just for the sake of this tutorial, you can just copy paste it in here. And then for URI, they want a very specific format. So it took me a while to figure this out. You want the quotes, you want get, and you want not to have the HTTPS, the whole thing. You literally just want to have api.coinbase.com/v2/accounts, which is our endpoint. So make sure it's exactly like this. And the last thing, this is the thing that took me weeks to figure out. For some reason, I kept doing this. I was getting a token, which you'll see you do get here. But yeah, the problem is what you'll find if you just have it like this and you go to the HTTPS to request the Coinbase, you're going to get an authentication error. So what's missing is this. So you can see in their signature, in their code example, they have the payload, which we just built, the key secret, which we already have in our credentials for the JWT node. And then you have something called the header. So the header, I don't know exactly how it works, but basically they want your key ID again, and they want to do this nonce thing, which basically is like a cryptograph, basically, carries your information in a secure way, as far as I understand. So the JWT node seems to already make the nonce thing, but it doesn't make the key ID. You have to add that again. So grab this exact same item. I know they want it like 3 or 4 times already, but grab it and just paste that in here and then just go. And basically this token you're seeing here should be working for our future parts of this process. Okay, so the next step is the fun part. We actually got to get our information. So for those of you who haven't worked with APIs and n8n before, there is no Coinbase node, so we can't do that. Instead, we have to contact their API using an HTTPS or HTTP request. Specifically to get this one, it's very simple. We should just be able to, you don't have to type all this stuff in. Luckily, you can do this thing called curl. So you see here on the page, they have this example request. you can just literally copy this, go here, and n8n has this feature called import curl. You just paste that command, you import it. Now you have everything you need, except you want to change this bearer token, because if you remember initially, they said that you want to authenticate with your own generated token. So, oh, that's not going to work. You have to change this to an expression, so you can add your variable, drag that in directly from there, and then execute it. And you can see now I'm getting my account information. I'm going to actually blur this or hide it, because obviously I don't want people knowing, the amount of crypto I have. And I think it's just kind of weird to do that. But I promise you guys, I'm seeing this, and I looked into my account like just recently, and I can verify it's all the right and updated information. So just going back to the wireframe, you can see it's already way more complicated than we originally thought. We added an additional step for a JWT. I'm just going to quickly add that in. Now that we've updated the wireframe, we can move to the next step. So one thing you'll also notice in your output, again, I'm not going to show it here, they don't give you the dollar amount of how many coins you have. They only give you the literal quantity of coin you have. So this is not a dollar value, which is kind of weird. I think the one thing that they should have done is give you the total balance of your account. I couldn't figure out a way to do that. If you guys can, if you guys figured it out, let me know. Because we don't have that value, we have to figure out a way to determine it based on the quantity we have of the coin, and then converting it using their active conversion calculator, which they do have one, and I will show you that next. So yeah, if we go back to our documentation here, on the side there's a API reference called the exchange rate API. And this one doesn't actually require any authentication at all, as you can see here, because it's just public knowledge. All you gotta do is curl this, we're gonna do that, and we're gonna do another API call called exchange rate, convert to USD, we'll call it for now. Again, we're gonna import the curl, go here. No, that's not what I was thinking. Oh, I understand it now. So basically, this endpoint is going to return whatever token you want to have exchange rates for. So you can see, for example, here, if I import this and we get currency BTC, we're going to get all the exchange rates for BTC. Now, that being said, you might have multiple coins here. So you want to do basically a value based on what amount you have. So how are we going to do that for all the items we have, right? So you can do that using an expression. Instead of BTC, we want to have data, and this is what we want to have converted, right? So that's only going to give you this first item, though, because we have multiple other coins, right, in our system. So we need to figure out a way to basically make it so that we can just get all of this in one go. Otherwise, it's going to be a massive pain. So it's actually pretty simple. So what you're seeing here in the schema is a bunch of different data points, and each data point corresponds to one a kind of crypto. And this whole thing is what's called, I believe, an object, or these are all objects, and this is I honestly kind of forget. I think this is a list, or this is an array of objects, I'm pretty sure. But we want to have it super clean. So you do it like this. You got to get something called a split out node. So we're going to make another thing here. We're going to look for a split out node, and it turns a list inside items into separate items. So we want to split the data points into their own separate coins, so it's super clean. We're going to do this now, and you can see, again, I'm going to black this out because I don't want you guys knowing what I have. But now we have really nice just items for whatever we're needing here. I'm also noticing something else, and that's on my screen. For some reason, there's a few items there that have 0 value, and I don't have any of them in my account. So we don't want to have to deal with those going forwards, so we're going to want to filter those out. Before we do that, I'm just going to do this, object to items. And yeah, to filter those items, we're going to have to use a filter node. So we're going to use this filter node. And basically, we want to filter it where that amount is 0 and not have those included. We want the JSON balance amount. So it's going to come over here. Now, every item in our table is going to be parsed through. So this is where it gets confusing. You'd think it's a number, but these values are counted as strings. You can see that it's T means a string. So we want to keep it as a string value. And because this is where it gets even trickier, if you have a bigger item like a Bitcoin where you have less than one of them, something that starts with a 0 would remove the Bitcoin. So you want to make sure it starts with like, does not start with 00 or even less, actually. Basically, you want to look at the item that you have the least of and make sure that item is not going to be filtered out. In my case, 0.00 will do it, and I only get on the right the items that I actually own. But in your case, you might need to do 0.00, 0.000. For most people, this option should work. Otherwise, you might need to convert this amount to a number first, and then basically nothing that's 0 should be allowed to be parsed in here. But you can see we only really need like one of these. And in fact, the only item we want is for the next HTTPS is the actual currency name. So we're going to set those values with something called a set node. So set node or edit fields is something that will, apologies, we want to do this after here, actually. And then we'll drag this over just to make space here. So we're going to set values. And you can see like we have all this stuff. All we really want is the currency in this case. Basically, I'm going to call that currency here, set it up here. So instead of having to do balance.currency, we just get currency. And finally, we can move that back in here where we get the currency. I can pull that in here. And then we get 3 different items. So finally, we can get 3 at once. To convert an item to USD, we have the exchange rate, but we also need to have the amount that we got. So that's why I set this up, right? Because we actually need to basically multiply the exchange rate by the amount. So we have the amounts here, as you can see. We're going to make another set value for amount and put that in here. And now you can see when we execute the set value step, we're going to get new data. So we're going to get in the same table an amount for each item. Again, I'm not showing this, but just take my word for it. So we're not going to parse that through this because we don't actually need to. But what we do need to is to do a calculation. And the best way to do this is going to be with the code node. Now, I promise you, you don't need to know any code for this. It's a very simple thing that I literally just generated off of ChatGPT. I don't really do code myself. So this is the code. You can see it's very simple. It's very straightforward. And you can see we're having an issue here where it's not showing the amount, it's just showing the rate. So why is that happening? Well, probably because we didn't connect this to here. So we're not getting the value that we want. But now we're not getting the rate. We're getting them in separate items when actually we want them to be in the same item, just for simplicity's sake. Otherwise, it'd just be kind of weird. So before this code node, we need one final node, and we're going to disconnect this connection called a merge node. So the merge node is going to combine the amount with the conversion data so we can put it in one section for the code to basically convert to USD. So yeah, go here, get a merge node, and we're going to want to do combine by matching fields which have different names. We want to grab currency from here. And then I believe we want to have this currency as well. So it's going to be data.currency. That way we can have all the data. Oh, I see the problem here. We didn't drag the other one in. So drag that in, try that again. Again, didn't work. Oh, probably because we mixed these 2 fields up. It's probably the data.currency in the input and currency on the bottom, because the input number 1 is actually from this conversion, which is where the data.currency is coming from. Right, data.currency, as you can see there. And this one is just directly gives you a currency. So this time it should work. And it does. So now we have all that data. We have the amount and we have the currency in here. I honestly don't remember what this does, but I remember this was necessary. I kind of forget why, and it's a little bit bugging me, but we'll go with it for now. Okay, so just some more testing. I'm pretty sure the reason I had the merge node was for proper formatting for the code module. I see. This is exchange rates. Getting myself really confused here. And this is convert to USD. So yeah, that was for formatting basically, so this code would work. And you can see we get this really nice output table here with the amount of our coin, the rate at which it's going for, and the value. Though you can see we're only getting one item here. If you have multiple coins, you have more than one. So you have to change this mode to run once for each item. Do that again. Now you're going to get however many items you have in a single table. Okay, and then the last step pretty much, you want to combine all these for a single value, right? We have each individual one, and you can do whatever you want with these. But if you want the total value of your wallet, you're going to have to combine them. So for this, there's a node called summarize, where you can basically combine everything. So how we do that, we go to aggregation mode. We're going to go to sum for adding these together. And basically, we go for the USD value. So we're going to execute that. And again, I'm not going to show you this value, but I'm telling you that it gives me the amount that I have. Now, there are a lot of decimal points there, so you might want to do something at the end, like really making a USD with 2 decimal points. And for that, we can do another edit fields. I'm going to call this total USD. And we're going to make another one. We're going to call it total. And you basically do this formula. So again, copy, paste it, write it in as it is. But basically, this is a formula that rounds the value to 2 decimal places. Do it again, and there we go. Not going to show you it, but it is rounded this time. And that's basically it. You can take that value and do whatever you want with it. For me, like I said before, my goal is to move this to a spreadsheet. So you can get a Google Sheets node and do that, right? For me, it'll be Sheets. That being said, I'm not going to show that whole process. I'm going to show you how it could look like. I could append a row and look for my proper sheet. But like, yeah, you can do whatever you want. You can send this as a text in Telegram. Now that you have this value, which took us so long to get, you can do whatever you want with it. So yeah, I hope that was helpful. This is my first tutorial teaching this, so I'm sure there was some hiccups and mess ups, and there definitely was with this section, but we figured it out. And the hardest part really for this, for me, was just generating the JWT. I found that to be really super hard. So once you have that out of the way, honestly, it's pretty easy. And yeah, the code, however little of it we have, is very basic and just generated by ChatGPT. So again, really hope this helps. And yeah, talk to y'all later.